Okay, I think we're live, which is exciting. Oh yes.
Yep.
We have our first attendee. Hey Steve, how you doing? And Clark, nice to meet you. We'll probably start, just so you guys know, in about a minute, just to give everybody a chance to join, and then we'll do our fun introductions and things.
So now, do we know, Chris, how many people we have joining from different areas?
I think we've got quite a few this time. It's quite exciting. It's always a fun question. So, guys, so I'm in London and Melina's over in Berlin. We'll do proper introductions in a bit, but we always like to see who's the furthest attendee. So if along with all throughout, you can ask questions in the chat, but feel free to pop us a note in chat, you know, where you're from and how you're doing. Try and make it nice and interactive as we go through. I think, the record so far was one person from Australia and one from San Francisco. Oh, Amsterdam.
Nice, nice.
Likewise, we are definitely grey and rainy. As I get slightly older and the grey hair comes, I start to realise that that's good for the grass.
Well, now that I have grass out in my backyard, I'm actually eager for rain.
There, see?
We might get a little today here in Berlin. We'll see.
Awesome. Cool, guys. Just for those guys like Marco who just joined, we're going to just give it another minute just to make sure everybody gets a chance to join, and then we'll kick it off. So we'll only be a minute behind or so. And thank you for joining, of course.
Yes, thank you. It's exciting to have so many customers all in one place.
Yeah. Our VIPs. Awesome. Cool. All right. I reckon we can actually get going. And I can do the intro bit, which is all the boring stuff. And then I'll hand over to Melina. So we just move these little boxes out the way. Cool. So thank you, obviously, to everyone for joining. This is actually our first webinar. So we do two different series of webinars, but this is our first sort of customer-only webinar. And it's really exciting because we've got customers spread all over the world, and obviously, you know, we love to speak to you guys as much as possible anyway, but I think on our next slide, we've got a little note which is referring to kind of, oh no, that's the housekeeping. I'll do the housekeeping first, then the reasons why we're doing the webinar. Classic, but we will be recording this, so obviously we really hope you can stick out to the end, but if the cat or the baby, now that you're working at home, distracts you too much, we will be sending out the recording anyway. We want to make it as interactive as possible, so from the chat function down towards the bottom of your bar there, throw out any questions, and I'll throw them at Melina, either during or at the end. We'll see how we go with that. And we're going to do a fun little promo thing, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But as everybody knows already, you know, we run as many customer meetings one-to-one as you like. So any questions you've got that maybe we can't answer, please do reach out. We're here whenever you want to engage, run sessions and the like. So if we jump onto the next slide, this is who you'll be talking to today. So I'm just the moderator, so I'll be doing questions and what have you. But Melina, if you wanted to just do a little intro as to who you are and why you're here.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I think I've met some of you, if not most. And so my name's Melina, and I'm going to be hosting the majority of the webinar today. And yeah, I'm really excited to kick this off. And of course, after this session, if you ever need any human contact that is EyeQuant related, I'm here to help you and partner with you, and help you leverage attention and do all of the cool things that you can do with EyeQuant.
Brilliant. So yeah, what's it all about? So this is the first one. We're gonna do a series of these. And we do want to hear from you. Give us all the feedback. I'm sure it will just be great. But any topics that you'd love us to cover, even if any of you actually wanted to join a session and we can kind of do it together, that'd be really good fun. But the real point is that we get a lot of recurring questions, whether it's about EyeQuant or what you're doing with EyeQuant, or just the day-to-day roles that you guys have. And so we kind of thought we'll, really run the agenda for the series around the recurring themes and things that maybe people struggle with. So I think on the next slide, these are the exciting topics that we'll be covering off. I'll let Melina take you through those. But what I did want to note was next week, just for your diaries, we have a session that I think you'll also find really interesting, which is around digital experimentation. So Optimizely will be talking with us. They're one of our partners. And the whole point is that the time to start that is now. So that's on May the 6th, so Wednesday at 2 p.m. UK time. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Melina.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm really excited actually about today's session, because we're going to be talking about competing for attention against other brands. So here we are in the digital age, and it's all about visibility and engagement. And EyeQuant is here to help you leverage attention towards those engagement opportunities. So what we're going to do today is look at the specific learnings that you can get from running a competitive analysis. And some of the topics that we're going to cover are actually running that analysis with or on your competitors, rapidly testing different ideations and ideas, making and testing changes to a live website, and also when you should use EyeQuant with other data that you have at your disposal. So at the end of the session, you should be able to run your own comparative analyses at any scale. Things like industry benchmarking, journey flows, one-on-one brand comparison. You can translate what you're going to learn today into all of those different scenarios. You'll also be able to look for competitive advantages in the data, be able to quickly test different ideas and iterations, as well as be able to make and test changes directly to a website. We're going to actually showcase that by collaborating between the EyeQuant Chrome browser extension, as well as a pretty cool extension called VizBug, and we'll showcase what you can do with those two tools collaboratively. As Chris mentioned, we actually have a bit of a promo, so we have a little extra credit opportunity here for you. For those of you who'd like to follow along and run your own competitive analysis alongside what you're seeing on your screen, you have an opportunity to earn extra 10 credits on your account for the month of May. So all you actually need to do is run a comparison of your own and then share those results with me, and we'll be able to add the extra credits to your account. And if you don't want to do this little extra credit opportunity while you're on this session, you can also follow up afterwards and send us that share view within a few days after this webinar. No problem. All right, so for those of you who do want to follow along, we're actually going to start now, but I encourage you all to log into your EyeQuant account if you haven't already done so. And you can actually find the login directly from our website if you need help with that. And if you do need any sort of technical help, please feel free to jump into the chat and ask for help from either Chris or our silent partner, Alice, who's also on the call monitoring. I would like to encourage all of you to connect your browser extension. And so we actually I personally use the browser extension quite heavily, especially when I'm running a competitive analysis. So we're going to be using that a lot today. And to do that, you just navigate to your account page within the app. And at the bottom of that account page, you'll see where you can connect the Chrome extension. You have to do this through the app, and then it will take you into the Chrome browser store. And then you'll be able to validate that you've actually connected that. All right. The next step would be to select your competitor. So when you're running a competitive analysis, you need to, of course, think of what brands you actually want to compare, or in some cases, what journeys you want to compare. And so the types of questions that you probably want to ask are, What are some inspiring brands that you may want to get some learning from? Who are your direct competitors? Or, you know, if you're not sure, just look for any interesting brands that you think would go well for this exercise. The other types of things to consider would be the type of page that you want to analyze. So when you're running a competitive analysis, you want to try and analyze similar funnel segments. So for example, content pages, free trial, or signups, plans and pricing, shopping carts, product detail pages, different parts of a UI. So you want to try and keep them similar. So decide what kind of landing page you think would be interesting for you to compare. And then ask, of course, what are the engagement goals for these different landing pages? And what on each of these different pages would motivate visitors to actually engage in the direction that you're expecting. So I know that's a lot, but we're going to cover quite a bit of this. We'll repeat some of that information as we go forward. One other pro tip is that you want to try and pay attention to how brands are performing, and make sure to try and take learnings from brands that are performing either laterally or up. So it's better to take learnings essentially from higher performing brands, or brands that are performing in competition with you. You don't want to necessarily take learnings from brands that are performing poorly. And you know, this will make the insight a little bit more interesting and give you better learnings. And also consider who the target market is for each of these brands, as well as how most traffic reaches this landing page. If you have that kind of information, it's really helpful when you're trying to figure out what's going on at each stage of the journey here. So our lineup today is Hulu and Netflix, and we chose to review these two brands because these types of streaming services are currently experiencing a growth in subscriptions, which means that we need to be paying close attention, or excuse me, these brands need to be paying close attention to their competition and make sure that they try and outperform them and win more customers. So these two brands are actually performing relatively close to one another. What we have here on the screen are the competitive metrics pulled directly from Alexa 500. And this is free for you to access. You can look up any brand and see how they're performing. And this is really helpful to determine, you know, also what kind of brands you want to compare against, but areas to look for where they might be performing a little bit better, or sometimes worse than your brand. And so in this case, it looks like while the two brands are performing relatively close to one another, it seems that Hulu could try and be a little bit more competitive to how Netflix is performing. So we see that Hulu has more page views, but has a higher bounce rate than Netflix. So we're going to take a look essentially at the visitor journey with the end goal, the engagement target, to increase subscriptions. So both of these brands want to increase their subscriptions. And so we have an example journey here in front of you where we want people to see the motivation to subscribe. We want them to click the next step, and then we want them to submit their email or information. And so we're going to look at the different stages of this engagement funnel and try and deduce what's going on and why one site might be performing better or worse. So we want to capture the first impressions of each stage of the funnel, and the funnel is to increase subscriptions. And the first step is to actually physically capture the design segments at each stage, and then test them with EyeQuant. So what you're looking at on your screen right now is just a sample GIF of actually capturing the first impressions at each of these stages. And I'll actually walk through this on the actual website so that you can see what this looks like live. But in essence, you want to make sure that whatever stage of the funnel is going to have influence on the target engagement, you want to make sure to capture that and see what's going on, and make sure that the first impressions are aligned with the engagement goals. Oops, sorry, I went too far. Let's actually jump right in. So this is the Hulu homepage that we're going to be testing. And when we run through to test these pages, as you saw in the gift, you actually just want to run your analysis. And once you have that Chrome extension installed from the account page in your app, you'll see it pop up just as your other extensions do, and you'll be able to analyze any page directly as you see it. So right here, we're just analyzing the home page, for example. And I can navigate back, and then I can start looking at the different segments of the funnel. So if we want to try see what the next step is, we click on that button, and now we see the plans page. And I can take another snapshot of this. And as I press this button, it's actually running the analysis in the background. And so we do this throughout the rest of the engagement funnel. And we do this not only for Hulu, but also for Netflix, for example. And this takes us to the various stages. And as you get to these different stages, again, you run that analysis. So what you're doing is you're capturing the user journey and trying to understand how visibility is impacted at different stages of this journey. I'm going to go ahead and close all of these tabs. I've already run several of these analyses, and so I'm going to actually navigate directly into the app. And you can either do that through logging in directly, as we did already at the towards the beginning of this learning session, or you can actually navigate there by looking at the full results from your Chrome results. And so I closed the tab a little bit too soon, but there is in fact a button that will take you directly into the app from the summary page of the results once you've run an analysis using the Chrome extension. And so the button is here on the right-hand side, see full results, and this will bring you directly into the app. Okay. So from the dashboard, I'm actually going to search for a project that I created specifically for this class. And so as you can see, I've actually run already a few tests looking at the different stages of the funnel for both of these brands. And the first one that we actually want to look at is just the homepage, top of the funnel for both Netflix and Hulu. So I'm going to go ahead and select these two thumbnails here. And I've actually renamed them to make it a little bit easier for me to find the different segments, because you can tell from these thumbnails it might be a little bit difficult for me to differentiate between the different variants that are in here. And you can do that really easily by just clicking on the pen tool when you hover over one of the names of the thumbnail, and you can change the name of that result directly there. And again, that just makes it easier when you're going back through for organizational purposes and keeping your head clear when you're running all of these tests. So once you have 2 or up to 6 thumbnails selected, you can actually run this comparison. And so I've selected to the Hulu home and Netflix home, and I'm going to compare them side by side. And now what I'm going to be able to do is actually look at the visibility differences in different angles. And so we're going to run through the different features that you see whenever you run an analysis through EyeQuant, but you actually get to see this side by side. And when you want to expand this so that you can get a little bit more detail, you can always expand any of the map views so that you can see it in full frame. So this first feature that we're looking at is called the perception map. And again, we're looking at the differences between these two brands. But what we're looking at here is the first impressions when people first land on these design segments. So I've moved the transparency slider all the way over to the right. And what that does is it allows me to see only the elements which are influencing my first impressions. And so this, in essence, is going to tell you what data or what elements are actually informing visitors of the context of the value propositions, where they should go next. All of that is either visible or not. This is your sort of pass-fail ratio. The attention map, that's your typical heat map. This is showing you where the attention is actually distributed. And this will actually showcase the most valuable area of the page when we think about attention. And So what we're looking at right now between Netflix and Hulu is Netflix has a much more focused amount of attention on their hero, whereas Hulu actually has a diffused amount of attention across the page. So you can see attention is on the hero. It's also on the secondary heading, which is a descriptor. You've got a little bit on the CTA, and then quite a bit actually towards the bottom where it's advertising the different other brands that are included in their subscription at a higher price. So, you know, there's a sort of, the attention isn't going all in one place. It's sort of spread throughout the page, and that can be used as an advantage. But again, we're looking at this from a competitive angle, and when we know that Netflix is experiencing fewer bounce rates than Hulu, we may want to take some of the learnings from this and try and focus attention in our next iterations. We can also confirm which areas are actually getting the most focus. So our hotspots feature actually shows you the different eye movements that a person would make and how much focus and how the intensity of each of these focal points. And so you can see that the largest circles are actually the highest focal point. So this is where you'll see the most focus is in the largest circles. Smallest circles mean it gets the least amount of focus of these 10 focal points. And what this allows you to do is understand the hierarchy, the visual hierarchy of the different pages that you're on. And so what we can tell from here is that the first eye movement for Hulu is on the sort of descriptive heading, but then attention immediately goes down to the bottom and then eventually back up to the top. And so that can give you a bit of an indicator as to what might be distracting for some of the visitors that are here on this site, as opposed to Netflix, where all of the focus is staying on that hero heading, that value proposition and motivator. So the next step is to navigate here to regions of interest. So I've just clicked on regions of interest, and that's going to bring me to a page where I've actually already added the regions of interest, and I'm going to go ahead and remove them so that you can see how to add them yourselves. It's quite easy and doesn't take very much time. But before I do that, what I want to actually explain is regions of interest is meant to be used as a comparative tool. So whenever you add a region, as I'll do now, what you're doing is actually measuring the pixels within that region and measuring the visibility of those pixels against the average visibility of the design on its own. And so essentially what you're able to do is understand specifically how visible various elements are in contrast to the rest, or in context to the rest of the design, as well as in context to one another. And so I'm going to add multiple regions to each of these different designs. And if you're starting to get lost and you're wondering, you know, why it's so hard to see, you can actually expand this and add your regions from an expanded view. So this makes it really easy when you're doing a competitive analysis to add as many regions as you want, small regions, big regions, overlapping regions, just expand it and it makes it much easier. So when you add the regions, you can move them around, you can resize them. And what I recommend is that you try and select the elements on this page which are key towards that motivation, towards the engagement. And so what I'm focusing on right now is we have the hero heading, which if I click on that, I'm going to put hero heading. And then we've got, I'm going to say heading 2. And then we've got our CTA. And when you add the different titles to each of these regions, you'll actually see in the competitive analysis, you'll actually see a table pop up, which will allow you to add those 3 regions and place them. So this makes it really easy to make sure that you're comparing similar elements across the different brands. So I'm just placing these regions and resizing them around the elements where they make sense. So again, we're looking at similar elements, hero heading, the secondary heading, and the call to action.
Melina, just a question. So can you just go over again how it can be 119%?
Yes, absolutely. So what you're looking at here is, as I said, it's a comparison tool. And so each of these regions is measuring the visibility of the pixels within that region in comparison to the average visibility of the design. And so on its own, if you were just to select one region on one design and leave it there and see something like 119, that's not going to be very interesting or valuable. Where this becomes very powerful is when you look at it in comparison to other features, or across different landing pages, or across different iterations. And so you can have percentages that are over 300. You can also have negative percentages, because what it translates to is it's that much more or less visible than the average, which is 0. And so where this becomes really powerful is when you look at the ranking here, you can see that the most visible feature is actually the secondary heading, the heading 2, followed by the hero heading, followed by the call to action. And what you can do with that information is figure out whether or not that's aligned with your engagement goals. And you can also look at this from a competitive standpoint, which is what we're doing today, and see how see the difference in ultimate visibility between all of these different key features. We have the same key features across both of these different brands, but their visibility ranking is different. And so Netflix is obviously focusing a lot on where the value proposition is, where the motivation is, whereas Hulu tends to have that attention a little bit more displaced throughout different areas of the design. And so we don't see quite as much focus. It's not as visible in comparison to the rest of the design. So one of the things that we may want to take from this as our learnings is that we want to try and get more focus on those value propositions, on the motivation for Hulu, and try to be as competitive as we can be with Netflix, and maybe pilfer a little idea from them in the way that they're doing it. And so we're going to actually look at a way to test that idea. But before we do, I want to first navigate over to our design metrics tab. And our design metrics tab actually contains 2 separate types of data. So everything that we've looked at from now, perception map, attention map, hotspots, and regions of interest, is all based on visibility data. So that's data that we've collected from actual humans, and we've collated that data, and we've mapped out the underlying perceptual patterns in that data so that we can see how specific features influence our visual cortex and where people will focus. Now, the 2 types of data that you see on your screen now are also based on real live human studies, but based on different sets of data. So we've got cognitive load, and that's our clarity score. And this is determining how clean and clear designs are perceived to be, or how much cognitive load is placed on the visitors when they're on that particular design segment. And then we also have excitingness, which is telling us how stimulating a design is perceived to be. And so we have actually 2 different sets of data that we're looking at. And this is actually a really handy feature to pay attention to when you're looking at a competitive analysis. So first of all, you want to try and be as clean and clear as possible. So we want to try and reduce cognitive load for our visitors and make sure that we are leveraging attention in the right way and not distracting them from either getting frustrated or leaving to go do something else. And so we want to make sure that whatever the context is, whatever the value proposition or motivation is, and whatever it is that they're supposed to do is very clear and it's easy to find. And with excitingness, this is all about the emotional level of the visitor and how stimulating or how calming that design is perceived to be, and whether or not that's aligned with your branding, with your goals, and with your industry. And so we're going to have a look at the various comparisons here between the different segments for Hulu and Netflix. But what we can see right now is that they are fairly aligned at this stage of the funnel. They have they're scoring very closely for clarity. And while Hulu is not as exciting as Netflix, it's not too far behind. So the other elements that we actually want to be looking at are the different stages of the funnel. That's just the top of the funnel. And then there's actually two other stages that we want to look at together. So I'm going to actually, as I've said, I've already renamed them, but we're going to look at the plans page as well as the form field that you would fill out for your email address or personal information. So what I'm going to do is actually select the plan page for Hulu here, as well as the plan page for Netflix. And that's this one over here. And then we also have the form field for Hulu. That's this first thumbnail, and the form field for Netflix. And they're a little bit scattered around, and this is why it's helpful to rename them. And once I've selected those, I'm going to compare them side by side. So this comparison feature is not only useful to compare the same landing page across different brands, but it's also useful to look at the user journey all in one go. And so what you're looking at here is the side-by-side. I'll turn this transparency slider to the right. You're looking at the side-by-side here, Hulu versus Netflix on their plans page. And then also down below, we have Hulu versus Netflix for their form page. And again, you can toggle this transparency slider when you want to see what's underneath. And then you can also turn it all the way to the right so that you can only see what would be influencing visitors' first impressions. So we can get kind of an idea of what's visible. And, for instance, Netflix, choose the plan that's right for you. And then you can see there's some information here that maybe isn't digestible in those first few seconds of being exposed to the design, but you can see that it's in the periphery. Over on Hulu, they also see choose your plan. And then you see the sort of CTA button down there. On the form field, we have create your account and then some form fields. But on Netflix, we're looking at actually quite a bit of information. So let's actually navigate over to the attention map so that we can get a better idea of how attention is actually being spent. When we looked at the home page for both of these brands, we saw that Hulu has a bit more of a diffused attention on that page, and Netflix has more of a focused attention for their home page. And it looks like this actually, for the plans page, stays consistent. So Hulu has a bit more of a diffused amount of attention, although it is targeted in terms of its focus on the one plan. So it's targeted in terms of the direction. So the attention is actually directed only on the one plan. For Netflix, they're focusing all the attention on the context of this page, which is to choose your own plan. Whether or not that's a value proposition as well, or whether or not that heading is going to actually motivate visitors to interact and engage with this page is not necessarily in question at this point, but we're looking at where the attention is going. For the form field, it looks like Hulu has the majority of their attention completely focused on the context create account, whereas Netflix actually is a little bit more diffused this time. So what we're going to do now is actually take some of these learnings, and by the way, you can of course navigate through each of these different features to understand a little bit more about how each of these brands is performing in various levels. So for example, we see for clarity, it's fairly consistent. All of these stages in the funnel are actually performing really high for cognitive load, or reducing cognitive load, performing high for clarity. Once we leave the home page, which actually had fairly high excitingness scores for both Hulu and Netflix, it looks like we're dropping pretty low into these next segments. So we're scoring between a 7 and a 15 between Hulu and Netflix on these next stages of the funnel. Now, one of the questions that we sometimes get from customers is what makes a good or bad excitingness score? And I think what's important to consider at this stage is the type of stage that you're on when it comes to, entering in your personal details versus trying to sell a product. These are stages of the funnel where you want to try and play with the excitement level and lean it towards the advantage, whether you want them to be in a more calming state of mind or whether you want them to be more excitable. So some examples that I can give you would be if you're asking people to enter in their financial data or their personal details, you may want them to be in a more calming state of mind. Whereas when you're trying to sell a product or get them excited about a product, you might want to get them into a more excited state of mind. And so I would say, based on what we're looking at here, it's probably pretty aligned that we have lower excitingness scores. But actually, we're going to take another look at some of the findings in the deck here. So I will navigate back to the app momentarily, but first I just wanted to go through some of the findings. So we have different stages of the funnel, and we've identified some of the differences. And just to keep it really high level, for Hulu, for both the first and second stage, which is the home page and then the plans page, we have diffused attention. On the home page for Hulu, you've got some competing elements that may be distracting or frustrating. And on the plans page, you have diffused attention, but it is in fact targeted in a certain visual direction. On the other hand, Netflix has focused attention for all of their pages. You've got on the home page, focus attention on the hero incentive. And then when you get to the plans page, you see the focused attention on the context of the page to choose your own plan. And then when you get to the next step and to enter your information, you again see some focused attention to see the page context that you're supposed to start entering your information. This is actually the only stage where we saw Hulu have focused attention as well, which is on their form page. So this gives us an idea of some of the differences in attention and what we may want to be paying closer attention to ourselves when we're looking at the data. What you're looking at here is the clarity perception at the different funnel stages. And so what we take the clarity scores, and what you can do if you want to recreate something like this internally is just plug the numbers into your spreadsheet and create a very simple chart. But this allows us to actually see some trends where between Hulu and Netflix, their homepage and their form page seem to be fairly aligned. Where we start to see a difference is on the plan page. And just to specify, the red line is Netflix and the blue line is Hulu in this example. So we do see a bit of a contrast in clarity on the plans page. And so that may be a page that Hulu could be paying attention to and trying to increase their conversion for that page. We can also look at the trends for excitingness. Again, Netflix is red and Hulu is blue. And what we see actually here for excitingness is that Hulu and Netflix are fairly neck and neck. So they're pretty aligned in terms of the trend of how exciting each of these different landing pages are and the different steps in the funnel. So in this case, what you can do is just confirm when you're doing a larger scale brand and industry analysis is to confirm that these brands are performing in a sort of average way or as the visitors would expect, because this helps, of course, with the perception of each of these brands.
So, Melina, just one question from the audience, which was around, how do you know which is a high and a low excitingness and clarity score? So I have mentioned to people in the chat that obviously we can run a kind of benchmark for their own industry and target audience and what have you. But yeah, just a question on that.
So the scores are both on a scale of 0 to 100, and 50 would represent your average page on the internet. Of course, there's a lot of pages to choose from. So I'm thinking that the question is more about what determines a good or bad score, whether you should aim for a high score or low score. And the sort of quick answer when it comes to clarity is you want to try and achieve as high of a clarity score as possible without compromising your critical content. It's, in this attention economy, we want to try and remove as much of the distractors as possible and make it as easy for our customers to navigate throughout the engagement funnel to interact with our pages and with our designs. So as much as you can, increase that clarity score, remove as much clutter as possible, the better. We've actually conducted a study to show a correlation between higher clarity scores and lower bounce rates. So this is definitely something that Hulu should be paying attention to. There are some considerations, which is that mobile designs are trending to perform higher for clarity. So people do tend to utilize the vertical real estate a little bit more with mobile, it seems, and people do tend to expect a more streamlined experience when they're on mobile pages. Plus, they do tend to scroll more inherently. So we tend to see higher clarity scores on average for mobile designs than we do for desktop. With excitingness, we look for, and one more note about clarity is that there's types of pages that are going to have lower clarity scores, and that would be things like blog posts or email marketing campaigns. There's critical content on there that you just can't remove. And so what I recommend is when you're looking at pages that inherently have to have more information, more specs, more imagery, for example, with micro contrast and etc., which is contributing to a lower clarity score, take a look at how other pages may be performing similar like pages to see if you're aligned or if maybe there's some learnings you could take from that. You know, increasing font weight, increasing padding between lines, you know, just trying to play with opacity a little bit for some of the micro contrast images. There's certainly things that you can do to improve your clarity score. And with excitingness, the types of things that you need to be taking into consideration are your industry, your brand, your voice, you know, target market or audience, and what you're selling. So, you know, if you're selling life insurance or if you're a corporate law firm, you probably don't want to have a very high excitingness score. Likewise, if you're a business suite like QuickBooks, for example, you probably don't want a super high excitingness score. But if you're in the music streaming industry, or in this case, the movie streaming business, you probably want more exciting landing pages to get people excited about what they're about to, you know, do, or get them intrigued about your brand. So there's a couple of different factors involved when determining what your ideal excitingness score should be, and certainly happy to work with each of you to help determine what it should be depending on those factors that we just discussed. So once you've gone through the different learnings and you've sort of pulled some of this information from the EyeQuant results, and, you know, of course, keeping in mind the other types of data that you have, you know, your analytics, looking at the Alexa trends, it's time to start making changes, usually, you know, trying to test different ideas and see how you can impact certain, the visibility of certain elements. And so we've looked at this particular landing page with Hulu, and we know we want to try and make that attention more focused on the elements which are really motivational, the elements that are going to incentivize people to actually click and start their free trial. And so what we're going to do now is actually show you how to make changes to a live web page. And we're going to use an add-on, a Chrome add-on called VisBug. And I think, Chris, if you could plug that into the chat so that people could learn a little bit more about that. What VisBug actually allows you to do is make superficial changes to any website. If anyone is familiar with using the inspector developer tools in Chrome, you can essentially do all of this kind of superficial, these superficial changes with your Chrome developer tools, but VisBug just makes it really, really easy and simple. There's no HTML involved. You can literally click on elements, move them around, and adjust them. So I'm going to show you an example of how you can do that with this Hulu page. So as I move my mouse around, you can see that some of these elements are being selected. And there's various different features that you can click on here to move, to adjust. But some of the easiest things you can do is just click to where you want to go. And in this case, I want to try and adjust, you know, how diffused that attention was, and try and focus it as much as possible. So some of my hypotheses are literally just taken from what Netflix had done, and make the heading you know, take up less horizontal space. So take up 2 lines instead of 1. We want to also try and maybe focus the attention of the secondary heading. So I'm going to just adjust some of the wording here. Yeah, let's see. So I'm just deleting some words here that hopefully aren't super important. Okay, so we've made a couple of adjustments, and then I'm going to actually move this feature, this teal bar. I'm going to actually try and shift it down. So you can see that that's actually made some changes, and we don't know until we've tested whether or not those changes are going to produce positive results or results in the way that we want. But it's a good idea while you're iterating to test as you go, so that you can course correct. It's easy to go down a rabbit hole and, you know, test, you know, this one button and just try all of these different colors. But if you test part of the way through, you can stop wasting time on something that's not going to actually have as much influence as you might have thought. So once you've made the changes and you're satisfied, at least to test for now, you can just select or press the VisBug button once more, and you'll see it go away. Okay, now it worked. And once you've gotten rid of all the lines and everything, you can actually run that, the browser, our EyeQuant browser extension. And what's really cool about this is that you're making these superficial changes, and then you're rapidly testing that with EyeQuant directly on that site. So you don't need to use your any of your design tools or anything to make any complicated changes. You can just test this, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because what you're doing is you're just trying to test to see if you're headed in the right direction and if you're able to impact direction in a specific way. Once you've made those changes, I'm navigating now back into my Hulu versus Netflix folder, since I've already gone through this exercise. And we can actually take a look at the side-by-side between the different iterations and the original. So we have our original, that's this one here, Hulu Home. And then we have 2 testers. There's test 1 and test 2. So I'm actually going to compare all 3 of these side-by-side. So we can see with the perception map that we're already getting some differences even when we kept the teal, that teal element still above the fold with all of the information on there. It's still starting to get that visibility area a little bit more compact over the heading. That's looking at test 1. And test 2, where we removed that teal element with all of the other brands and everything, all of the distracting elements, when we've removed that, you see that the focus just shifts right up to look at just that incentive and that hero heading. We can look at the attention map to, again, confirm how we're actually impacting these really valuable areas with attention. And you can see the sort of kind of testing mind that caused me to move that teal bar down. So as you're testing with VisBug, for example, or your developer tools, and you run a test like in test 1 and you still see a lot of attention going down towards the bottom, then you start to say, okay, well, what if I shift it? And then you get to your test 2. And with test 2, you see that all of the attention is now hyper-focused on the most valuable regions, which is that element of motivation, so that visitors are more incentivized to actually click and subscribe. And then the other thing that we can do is, let's just rename I'm renaming this because, as you can see at the top, we actually have some additional table regions, and we want to actually try and just get them all to be 3, and so they need to be consistent. So we're going to say, this is just hero. Okay, good. So now we have 3 segments for each of these iterations. And when you look at the comparative analysis like this table up here will make it really easy for you to determine which of these iterations has the best visibility results across these different elements. So if we think about these key elements as the deciding factor for our visitors when they land on these pages, when they decide to engage, and when they're motivated to engage in the right direction, these key elements need to be visible. So our first impressions are super important. You know, people are making those first impressions in milliseconds, and so it doesn't give us that much time to get this key information in front of them, to make sure that we capitalize on those first impressions. And so what we're looking at is to increase visibility of these key elements, and make sure that the hierarchy of these elements is aligned with those engagement goals. And so we can see that the hero is increased from the original to the test 2. We can see how it's increased from 69% to 102%. The secondary hero, hero 2, that's the sort of descriptor line that actually contains the majority of the incentive. That goes from 88 to 170, so it's twice as visible as it was before. And then the CTA is also 30% more visible. So what's really handy about this information is, first of all, course correcting, testing your ideas, confirming your hypotheses. All of that is really great in that iteration phase, so that you don't have to wait for it to be live in order for you to continue on with your iterations. But it's also really great for explaining why certain design decisions should be made. So when you're talking to your colleagues and when you're talking to your stakeholders, you can showcase this information as reasons why you should try these new designs, or at least A/B test. So some of the main takeaways that I wanted to just go over very quickly. We're nearing the end, I promise. But we wanted to remember that Hulu was displaying a more diffused attention throughout the engagement funnel as compared to Netflix. And so we ran an iterative test to focus the attention on the hero, to be a little bit more competitive with Netflix. And it actually does seem to yield positive results. And so the hypothesis there is that if we focus the attention on the incentives and the motivating key elements, that the first impressions will be more valuable and less distracted for our visitors, or for Hulu's visitors. And for Netflix, they consistently focused attention on either the motivational elements or the context elements. They added quite a few extra steps. So it actually, to get to the form field, that was actually step 6. So there were 6 different pages for me to get through in order to, for me to get to that form field and enter in my information. So all of those extra steps actually risks frustrating potential subscribers. Maybe that they don't want to keep going through like page after page. They just want to see the plans, for example. However, all of those extra steps actually gives Netflix the opportunity to control what visitors can see at any given time. So it really controls that first impression and the visibility experience. So there's some food for thought there. The sort of pro tip that I'd like to leave with all of you is to use EyeQuant in addition to your current data stack. So focused and first impressions are super critical when it comes to engagement. And EyeQuant can actually help to determine the causality of why certain events are taking place or not taking place. And so when you use EyeQuant alongside your other tech stack, you can see the full user journey. You can see where people are clicking, where they're dropping off. You can see where they're scrolling or pausing, how they're ultimately engaging, how they're looking at it, how they're being impacted by it, and what their perception is, whether there's too much cognitive load or whether it's aligned with your brand and industry in terms of how stimulating or calming it is. And so I highly recommend that you bring the EyeQuant data alongside the other data that you're using, so that you can get a nice, well-rounded picture of what's going on with your designs. So I think we're perfect on time. Although not much time for Q&A, but I think we've still got a little bit of time left. I just want to remind all of you that we have this extra credit opportunity. So for those of you who've been practicing alongside and running your own competitive analysis, you can actually share those that result with me, and I'm going to show you how to do that. You can also do this anytime after this course, after this session, and send the share link. So I'm going to show you how to use the share link here. So you've got your competitive analysis side by side. Maybe you have two, maybe you have more than two. And from this page, you can use our share with button. So if you click on this, this will just give you a little indicator as to what you're going to do. You can create a public link, and from this public link, you can just send that link to me. You can share it via email with this button here, or just copy paste. And what that essentially does is it creates a read-only version of these results. And this is really cool when you're trying to share this with people who don't have access to the platform. You can navigate to regions of interest and see the different regions that someone has placed, but they aren't allowed to move them around, edit them. They won't be able to see any of your account information. But for anyone who wants to get that 10 extra credits, please send me this share link, and we'll make sure to put those credits onto your account. Okay, I think we've made it through. I'm here for any questions. Chris, do you have any questions lined up for me?
We do. So one of them was, do you have to rename the two web page screenshots before you do the competitive analysis?
You don't have to rename them at all. It's mostly just for ease of use. However, if you do want to rename them, you have to rename them from the project folder. You won't be able to rename them in the competitive analysis view.
Cool. Another one, which I think we'll probably be covering in subsequent sessions, but was, does this approach work on other media as well as websites?
Naturally. So, I mean, anything that you could imagine getting benefits from an actual eye tracking study, you can use EyeQuant for. So packaging design, ebooks, printed content, so like newspaper articles, for example, or advertisements, or in magazines, poster boards, you name it. This is, it's what EyeQuant is essentially predictive eye tracking. And it's 90% as accurate as an actual eye tracking study. So anything that you would want to use eye tracking for to get more data, you can use EyeQuant for. Any questions that you have about setting up any kind of medium to run through EyeQuant, if it's outside of the sort of mainstream, just chat with us, let us know, and we'll be happy to jump on a session with you.
Brilliant. No, just two separate questions on this, which was, have we recorded the session and will be sent it out? Absolutely. So we will be, you think it usually takes about 24 hours to sort of download. But once we've got that, we'll send that out to everyone. So you can watch online. You can still send us your comparisons. If you want to send those out, send them to Melina at EyeQuant.com, not Chris, because it could be her inbox. And then the other question was, from Mauricio, is there any way to analyze the full page, not just parts above, not just the part above the fold?
So we encourage you to use EyeQuant on all aspects of your designs, above, below the fold, and different levels of the funnel. And what we were looking at today was everything above the fold, but using the Chrome browser extension, if you simply scroll below the fold, you can take a snapshot of anything you're looking at on your screen. And that includes simulating a mobile device as well. One thing I would note, though, is that what you don't want to do with is upload a full-length design into EyeQuant in one go, because that will essentially be simulating a very strange-looking screen. Most people don't have screens that can view an entire full-length design at one go. So you want to analyze it in screen size segments of what someone could see on their screen at any given time.
Perfect. Just conscious of time, so we'll probably wrap it up there. Any other questions we haven't answered, we'll reach out to you directly. But as I say, do also feel free to reach out to us, and we'll run private one-to-one sessions with you on anything you need. So a big thank you from me to you, Melina. That was great. And based on the comments, I think everyone really enjoyed it as well. So thank you for sticking around for the hour.
Thanks, guys.